And the first annual Play a Story Slam on Zoom, and we hope it's the last one on Zoom. We have a great roster of storytellers for you today. There's been no rehearsal. We have no idea what they're going to say, but we have great faith they're all going to be wonderful. We haven't even put up a disclaimer that the thoughts expressed on this show don't necessarily represent, nope, whatever it is, it is. We'll all be hearing it for the very first time together. And here is Liz Fine to introduce our first storyteller.
Hello and good evening, everyone. I would like to introduce Melody Walton, who is going to be giving a slam called My Community. Take it away, Melody.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. So, my community. Sometimes when I walk around my community, I'm a little bit disappointed. Why? I can sometimes see a block that's a little bit dirty, maybe go into a store, two people are arguing unnecessarily and for no reason, for a dumb reason. But this particular day was different. So I went shopping. I was in one of my favorite supermarkets in my community, and I was ready to cash out, put all my groceries onto the cash register. And right beside me was a lady with an adult male, and I knew by just the mannerism of the male that he was a special needs gentleman. And I had seen them before in the community, before in the neighborhood. So we gave each other, the mom and I, we gave each other, I guess you could say what I would call a friendly nod or a smile, just to acknowledge, hello, but without speaking. And within a couple of seconds, the gentleman that was with her, which I now know is her son, he slumped over the shopping cart and his body went limp. Now, I previously lost a son, and my son was autistic. Immediately, I started crying, and I started crying really strongly. And I wasn't aware that it was so hard, but I also snapped into a mode that I wasn't aware that I could do. I started yelling, everybody stand back, give her space, because he was starting to tilt to fall. So the manager from the supermarket ran over, caught him before he fell. Then the security guard, who is a lovely gentleman from South Africa, his name is Bala. Bala took off his sweater, rolled his sweater up as if to make like a makeshift pillow, put it under this gentleman's head so that he could lay comfortably on the floor. And I started yelling as loud as I could. Well, not screaming, but yelling, please stand back. Please give them space. He needs space to breathe. With that going on, the mom was crying, just like I was crying. And now I'm on the phone dialing 911. While everybody is still standing around, the manager starts, in other words, it was a puzzle. The pieces were all not connecting, but at one point, everything started connecting perfectly. I was on the phone calling 911. I gave the address to the supermarket. I don't remember ever knowing the address to my supermarket. And they said, where are you? I said, 1891 3rd Avenue. And then I looked at the manager and he shook his head as if to confirm, that's the address. Don't know where I got that from. But through all the tears, through all the sadness and the memory that it brought back for me, it was a hard situation to be around, but it was comforting to see that everyone was working together to make sure that this gentleman was taken care of. Then I saw two gentlemen standing not too far from the gentleman on the floor, and I pointed to them and I said, "You two, go outside." It was like I was directing a play, I guess, but I said, "You two, go outside, stand outside, try to get into the street as far as you can and start flagging and waving down the ambulance so that they'll know exactly where to come." The ambulance came. I can genuinely say I believe they were there under 5 minutes. And that was unusual in my community. I live in Spanish Harlem. I sometimes think my community is forgotten for many reasons. But this day gave me such an uplifting feeling that look at this, look at how we all got together and did something together positive. And just as the woman was walking out, she grabbed my hand and she told me in Spanish, you know, gracias, mi amor, you know, my love. She gave me kind words. And I, in turn, said bendición, which is like a Spanish kindness, I believe, for seniors. I've learned that word through my Spanglish and my street Spanish over the years. But I got my faith back in my community. It took something so horrible to happen that it brought us together. And I'm sorry that things like that have to happen to make things better. But anyway, the young man is doing fine. He was rushed to the hospital. He was, in fact, having a seizure. And the mother, she grabbed my hand and held on to it, and I had to let her go. And yeah, I'm just really happy that he's okay. So I want to tell you, my community is awesome.
Okay, that was very good, guys. Thank you, Melody. Next up, we have Lolly Yacker Winterbaum, who's going to be giving a slam called Sleepaway Camp. Go ahead, Lolly.
I think sleepaway camp should be mandatory. Just think, it's a life learning experience that you just can't get in the classroom. It's a great escape from the city. I mean, when I went to camp, it was like living in primitive times. There was no electricity, so we didn't have the lights. There was no phones. Of course, maybe in the dining hall, the mess hall, we called it, that there was electricity, or the nurse's office, or the administrators, but we didn't have any. And, and going to sleepaway camp, it's sort of like when you send somebody away to college for the first time, they're living on their own, they're living with people that they don't know. Well, that's what sleepaway camp is. You're thrown away from your house, you're living with a whole bunch of strangers that you've never met before, and you've got to learn to live and get along with them. So I thought, okay, that's fine. But then I didn't realize that there's bunk chores. And if you don't, and one of the things is, if you're not used to cleaning up after yourself, and sweeping and washing, and the thing is making your beds with the linens, tidied in the corners. So we were given chores to do every day, and that was around breakfast time. And if you didn't do it, the counselors would not let you continue your other activities for the day. And they were 18 years old, so what did they know themselves anyway? So, but they would get you from morning with the reveille call. It's time to wake up. It's time to wake up in the morning, and work you so through the day. At night, you were just exhausted, and they would play, reveille in the morning and taps at night, da da dum, dum dum dum, and we'd fall asleep. Except for the evenings that we set out clocks to raid the boys' bunks. A lot of responsibilities were given, but there were a lot of firsts and a lot of achievements. I had my first boyfriend, the first kiss, and yes, today I'm still in contact with him 50 years later. I learned how to canoe, and during those canoe, and I even traipsed, through all of Harriman State Park, canoes and stuff. And what I love to do is tip the canoe over, and that would freak the counselors out. I would do it on purpose because we would have an air pocket underneath. So, but I did learn how to, have that skill. And again, today I could canoe forever. The Nature Museum was one of my favorite escapes. I go inside and I take out the snakes and I have them slither through my hands, and I soft and silky. The bullfrogs, when you grab them from the barrel, though, they're like pretty slimy. So you have to grab them so that they just don't hop out of your hands. But my favorite was playing with those baby raccoons, until they'd nibble you because they were hungry. But there was also, aside from the nature museums, there was sport activities. And my favorite sport was the tetherball. I don't know if anybody remembers. It's kind of like a rope hung to a ball, and you have to punch it around. I could stay there for hours because I was like the #1 tetherball player. Everybody challenged me and I would just be there and win. And the waterfront, I learned how to swim the different styles. And so that even prepared me for when I was in college, making money. I taught swimming. So the sleepaway camp does have lifelong lessons in it, and especially like the social aspects. You learn about the others, you learn about yourself. And to this day, from knowing about the sports and individual activities, I became a phys ed majored in phys ed and taught phys ed most of my life. So that was something that connected me, from sleepaway camp and those days. But coming back to the presence, about 5 or so years ago, it was time for my son, well, maybe more than that, it was time for my son to go to sleepaway camp. And as soon as I visited his camp, the memories started flushing back in my head. And I'm thinking, I want to be a child again. I want to go to sleepaway camp. It was so much fun. I had such a great time. But they say that sleepaway camp prepares you for your experiences in the future, and it prepares you for going away to college. And so it brought us to this point where my son went to sleepaway camp. He spent like 4 years there. He really enjoyed himself. He went away to college for 4 years. He just graduated. And so I think that connection, from some sleepaway camp, I still think it should be mandatory for all those experiences. But even today, I live across the river from where I did go to sleepaway camp. So I'm close enough to the city and far enough away. And that's what I think about sleepaway camp. Lots of fun.
Okay, thank you so much, Holly. That was very enlightening.
I think I cut it short.
Okay, next up, we have Lauren Reese who's going to be talking about visits.
Let me see. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. Speaker view. Do you see me? Hi, everybody. Liz, do you see me, everybody?
Yes, we see you very well.
Well, thank you.
Yes, yes. We
Very good. I only saw
Speaker
your
view.
name, so I was curious. Okay. A few years ago, when I was a teacher, I always looked forward to my Christmas vacation. Well, that year, I decided to visit my father, who is retired now in Florida, living on the property that was once the home of my grandparents. I really did look forward to it because it was kind of a dismal place, and I really didn't know much what to do with my father. However, I decided that this time I would make it more pleasurable if on the way I could visit an old acquaintance of mine who lived in South Carolina. He always told me he had a wonderful big house and I would really like to see it. So I made the arrangements with both of them, and in no time at all, the plane took me down to the airport in South Carolina. He picked me up and then he drove me to a wonderful antebellum mansion in the heart of Mars Bluff, South Carolina. Now, what was interesting about the house was it had 22 large Doric columns around it. It still was an active plantation growing tobacco, corn, and cotton. However, there were only a few people living in the house. That is Joe himself, his mother, whom he called Big Mama, and his aunt, who is Aunt Nina. They all welcomed me with open arms. He showed me around the place. The plantation still had some of the old sheds and where the slaves used to live and the sharecroppers years later. And then, but the best part of it was the dinner we had in the evening, where we all swapped stories about the wonderful place where I was. So after the meal, however, I felt a little queasy. I felt sick. So they showed me the bedroom where I would sleep that night, facing the back. I seemed to have a good night's sleep, but I woke up the next morning to the sound of shotgun sounds. I walked downstairs and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, it's the opening of the hunting season, and they're out in the swamp and back trying to find their prey." Well, I said, "I'd love to see more of this, but I really have to get on and see my father. So please, Joe, can you drive me to the bus station? And I have to really go on. I don't want to go there, but family ties." So he took me to the bus station, and 4.5 hours later, I was in Jacksonville. Then I took a local bus, and I ended up about a mile's walk to his little trailer by Orange Lake. Well, he wasn't there. And I thought he knew I was coming. So I sat around there, looked around, didn't like the look of the trailer. It was dank and inside it was dirty. I thought this is going to be some visit, especially after visiting the columns. But he did show up, got out of the car and said, "Warren, I forgot when you were going to come." And I forgave him. And also in the car was a elderly lady whom he called Doreen, his new friend. And he said, "Oh, I'm so happy. We made arrangements to redecorate the trailer." Of course, it's a little late for that, for me, but I was happy for him. And even though the visit was short, I was still happy to have seen him and to have maybe come a little closer to him from the past. So he drove me to the airport in Jacksonville. And I would say that I did see a little tear in one of his eyes. And we did part with affection. So I got home, and 3 days later, I got a phone call. My father was killed in a car crash. I was so happy to have seen him.
Thank you, Warren. That was so moving. I can't begin to tell you. Thank you so much. Our next story is going to be presented by Debbie Beck. And it's called An Unforgettable Journey. Okay, Debbie, take it away.
Hi, can you see me? I don't think I don't think I'm showing yet.
Yes, Debbie, we can see you. And Warren, would you turn your camera off, please?
Oh, of course. Thank you. Let's see.
Debbie, you're all set. We can see you.
Okay, good. I can't see me, but you can see me. So, um, when I was in my wilder younger years, my husband Bill and I were traveling around Europe, and we were planning to go to Tunisia. And so we flew to Rome. And at that point, we found out that there had been a bomb threat. So the flight was delayed, and everybody was camping out on the floor with their luggage and just trying to make the best of it. And eventually, at around midnight, I guess, we were able to board our charter flight to Tunisia, to Tunis. We finally got in around 2 a.m., but we found out that when we got there that the airport was closing. And I was planning to find a hotel by way of doing it in the airport. And as I said, it was my wilder years where now I'm sure I would plan ahead, but I wasn't planning ahead very well at that point. So we had met these people on the little plane, and we had no choice because we couldn't get a hotel. So we all went to this campground that they knew about. I went with them. And we had to sleep on the ground. We had a parea, which is like a piece of fabric that you can wrap around your body and whatnot. So that was all we had to lie on or to protect ourselves. And we did get eaten up by mosquitoes. So we managed somehow to get through the night. And the next morning, we were going to catch a bus to go to our destination, which was a resort village, Hammamet. So we went to where the buses were, and the buses kept coming, and it was always, oh, the next bus down. Wait a little while, the next bus down. We kept getting the same story over and over. So eventually we found a taxi, fortunately. And then he drove a while, and then at some point, he decided to let us out, even though we weren't in Hammamet. So he said, oh, it's over the hill. So we had to walk down whatever, and eventually we found our way to Hammamet. Anyway, when we got there, we wanted to find out our directions. In this case, we did have a reservation in town, and we went into the tourist office, but unfortunately it wasn't much help because the woman was blind, so she couldn't really help us very much. Anyway, we eventually did get there, and unfortunately, my husband got very ill, and I even got somewhat ill, but not as ill as my husband, and we had spent our days running to and from the bathroom. Apparently, almost everyone in the place was sick of one, either sleeping sickness or whatever, and everybody running to the bathroom, and it was like a Fellini movie. So eventually, we went to a doctor for my husband, Bill. It was like in the middle of the jungle, like in the middle of nowhere. So that wasn't too helpful. And then eventually, um, we managed to leave. We didn't have a very good time in Tunisia, and we wound up going to Oslo, Norway, and we're walking down the path. And this is like, I think, an interesting end to the story, because a gypsy called out to me and said, hey, American. I don't know how she knew I was an American. Hey, American, Elvis just died. And That's the end of my story.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie. That was like very different. Definitely unforgettable. Okay, Alan, are you going to start now? Well, maybe I should.
Hello, everyone.
Good.
Now, we're fortunate to have Milt Polsky. He's going to be telling us about his public school education.
Yes, and yes, and yes, and can I go?
See if they can hear, see.
Can I go now?
Yes, Milt, go ahead.
Yes, indeed, Alan, thank you. 1943, World War II was raging. And in that year, I was a student, a third grader in a school in my hometown, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And we were so fortunate to have this marvelous teacher. She was young. I think it was her first or second, maybe, teaching experience. Teaching third grade, eighth grade, 8-year-olds, you know, and it took a special talent for that. But she really had a secure feeling of creating an environment in which the children would really listen to each other, talk with each other, help each other, create with each other. And that was great. Now, one day she was, the children had chairs all around, and she was relating a Native American creation story, and it was going well, and they were discussing it, and then in walks the principal, you know, and he's carrying an envelope, and he quietly asked her, Ms. Coetzee, to stand off by the side with him. He gave her the envelope. He first patted her on her shoulder, and she opened it and she started crying. And he escorted her out of the room, and the assistant principal told us what the letter contained, that her husband he was a Navy flyer, and he had been killed in battle. And it was so sad, you know. You know, when I walked down the street in my hometown, Milwaukee, and saw a gold star in the window of various homes, I had a deeper resonance of the pain they were suffering, and also a feeling of gratitude for the children who made these sacrifices during wartime. So that was Miss Coetzee. She turned out to be an excellent teacher. She was always really sharp and attuned to the interests of the kids. Well, when the war was over in 1945, my family moved up to the west side, which was more affluent, a little bit more than the north side. And then I went to a different school. In 6th grade, I had Miss Schmidl. All names are as you hear them. Miss Schmidl was a polar opposite of Miss Coetzee. She demanded and got total control of her classroom. She wouldn't take any guff from any student. You know, she wore a dark blue dress, and she patrolled the classroom and making sure everybody was listening to her. So she one day was explaining her specialty, which is diagramming sentences, so great for grammar and learning how to write better. All the words were connected, participles and verbs and all that kind of stuff. And we, the students, were taking notes with pens dipped in ink, in the ink wells at that time, as some of you may remember that. And one kid was having trouble understanding what Miss Schmidl was doing with all these lines and, predicate, verb and all that. And he told that, he called out, I don't understand. And she said, shh, be quiet, I'll be over there and I'll explain it, but he kept it up and she was getting annoyed and she was getting flustered and frustrated. So she grasped one of these bottles of ink, but it didn't have any ink, it was empty. And I couldn't believe it. She hurled at him and it almost hit me. I was sitting next to this kid. So that was something, really something. She could go off the handle. But on the other hand, she was a great teacher. That diagramming sentences actually helped me to become a better editor and writer when in my later years. So that was great for her to do that. So I really appreciate you, Ms. Schmidl. Now I moved on to another junior high school, and that was Steuben High School. Had a lot of names, Otto, Hans, Wilhelm, Hans, but it was Steuben. He was American Revolutionary hero from Germany. And there I had this teacher, a gentleman, I don't remember his name, but he was very skilled. He was the shop teacher, and he taught us how to take found objects like wood, say, ordinary wood, and turn it into beautiful objets d'art, and it was great. So I made myself, with his help, a shoe shine box, with the shoe, where the place the shoe would go, and the sides had the cloths and the polishes. And my friend Bertel Ullman, who is my lifelong buddy, and he lives in our building here that NYU manages. Well, we went back to the north side and we went into bars and taverns and we shined those shoes very spiffy. And what did we get them back? We asked, how much is it? They said, we said, whatever you want. We did pretty good. But more importantly, we learned the stories of returning soldiers and sailors. We had anecdotes of very diversified part of the city that was great to share our interests and all that. That was just terrific. Now, I gotta tell you what wasn't so terrific, that in 9th grade, I ran for class secretary. I thought I was doing pretty good. I had written for the Steuben Scribe, the newspaper. I participated in sports, in-house sports. And Gary Minkin, God bless him, he made a poster that said, don't be guilty, vote for Milty. But the vice principal didn't quite agree with that. She called me into the office and said, you didn't register in time, so you're disqualified. I said, oh no, I thought I did, and that. But I had a suspicion that some of the teachers got together and put the kibosh on me, because during the day I would even then give out my puns and my jokes, and maybe I was interrupting the class and the students' work, the teachers' work. So that's how they punished me, by trying to get me not to run, and they succeeded. So now it's time to move on to high school. And there
Nope,
we had,
nope, I've got to tell you, you're up to 8 minutes now.
oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't really. Anyway, I don't know how I'm going to do this now. Anyway, I had a wonderful teacher in high school, Miss Strom, and she taught, we debated, we acted out scenes and so forth. I would meet her in the morning before she was working on her lesson plans, and she, we traded a lot of information to each other. And one time she came in, she went to the teacher closet, and then she hung up her coat, and she took off her hat, and along came her wig, and her head was bare, and all the kids were laughing, and I couldn't stand it because she was my inspiration for going to to be a teacher, and I'm just short. Anyway, I went on to college. I'll make this short. I wound up in medical school somehow. How the heck I got there, I don't know. I had no interest in science. I didn't take physics in high school, and here I was in a laboratory and with the other medical students. And my lab partner was Daddy Safer, and he was going to draw blood from me, and I was going to draw blood from him, and then we'd analyze it later. So Danny had the syringe, and he did a marvelous job. He drew blood, and it's fine. And then it was my turn to do the same to him. And he was sort of wavering already. Oh no, he was nervous, and I was.
Sorry to interrupt, Mill, but you're going on to 10 minutes now.
All right, so let me just finish this. Anyway, I went to put the syringe in, and his eyes started to roll around and around and around, and he fainted. That was the end of my medical school, but I still went to a public college, University of Wisconsin, and I studied what I want, theater, and I majored in playwriting. And later I got my doctorate, and my students called me doctor, even though I wasn't one. And that's my story of how public education.
Thank you, Milt. We followed you all the way from what? Elementary school through college. Next story slam, we can hear the rest. And now, Barbara Haspel, Prego, which means Italian for please, and also the name of my favorite tomato sauce. And here is Barbara.
Thank you. The word prego has many, many meanings. It means thank you. It means go after me. It means everything's all right. It means please, it's your turn. Can everybody see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This story actually began when I was sent to study Italian in Perugia, Italy, at the university. At that time, because we were immersed in the language, we were not to speak any English. And after 3 weeks, I thought we were doing well. I lived with an Italian family who served the most beautiful dinners, grapes picked from their vineyard, wine, cool wine, fresh cheese, bread. Everything was wonderful in the house except the 20-year-old daughter, who was very condescending to Americans, to students, but the rest of the family were lovely. In those days, a friend of mine who was a collector of Etruscan artifacts asked me to find something for him. Now, you know, it's illegal to do this. It is the black market. However, the minute I put the word out, a man came to see me and he showed me tear vases and other vases, but they were expensive. And because they were chipped, I felt I could not take the responsibility. But Perugia, looking out at the hills where the vineyards were waving through the cypress trees, and they were dotted with sunflowers. Each of those scenes absolutely took your breath away. It was almost like a movie was moving with the vines and the fruits and the vegetables. After 3 weeks, I had to go to Rome because that's where I would be studying with very famous maestro Luigi Ricci, who was Puccini's assistant conductor. Now, yeah, everyone wants to go there, Susan. I had money. The students were given a lot of money in those days. I was a Fulbright and money was flowing. And I decided that I would only get on the train first class. However, I did not want people to know that I was not Italian. And I decided to use one word only. Back up for a minute. While I was in Perugia, I had a green coat made, a very Italian A-line coat. So it was all prepared. I was going on the train and I wanted people to think I was Italian. I knew if I spoke in long sentences, they immediately pick up that I was an American. I still remember the train compartment. It was olive green velvet trimmed with gold, and the woodwork was a honey-colored wood. And next to me sat a very handsome Roman young man. I will tell you his name because, no one's publishing it. His name was Raphael Sorrentino. All I said was prego. But as the trip progressed and we said goodbye to these magical hills of Florentine countryside, we started to talk. And he asked me what I was doing in Italy, and I said I was an opera singer. And he said, my friend is a tremendous college fan, never misses a performance, and he can help polish your staging, which is what he did actually, because he had her movements down pat, and none of her Tosca was ever filmed except the second act. So he even helped me with the entrance. Anyway, as the trip went on, we started to talk much more freely, more intimately. And he said, Barbara, I want to tell you something most people don't know, but I'm gay. And Tony is my lover, and my family doesn't know. So, we were becoming close friends in this 4-hour train ride. And he said, I want you to come to my home on Sundays. Now, if you've ever lived in Rome, you know that Italians are lovely, but you don't get invited to the home. That is a rarity. And it was a wonderful upper class, yes, wealthy home. And we had a huge salotto, and we would sit all together on Sundays and talk. There was no television. It was lovely meals, served beautifully. Every member of the family knew me. I knew them. And it was the introduction to the most wonderful years I've had in Italy. Had I not met Raphael, had I not tried my best to converse with him, this never would have happened. But I just want to tell you the end of the story. Do we have a minute? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few
Go.
minutes.
A minute or so? Sure.
What's that?
Yes, go ahead. Finish it up.
Okay. I sang my first Tosca at the Teatro Eliseo in Rome. Callas had sung there. Now, I don't know who would do this if they weren't your own family. Raphael's father had a very big job. Let's say it was comparable to the head of Medicare in Rome. After the performance, he invited the cast, the conductor, and the person who ran the opera house, and I still remember Maestro de Tura, to a midnight dinner in a very beautiful restaurant just to celebrate that performance. So you see, with that one word, with that one trip, with that one friend, a world of magic opened. And even talking about it makes me long for those kinds of days again. That's that part of the story. There are many more Italian stories I could tell you, but that was the one word, prego. Thank you.
And prego to you too for that wonderful story, Barbara.
Thank you.
And now we have Susan Epstein. I think we should all pay attention to this one closely. She's going to tell us about the illusion of marriage. What will we learn?
Here, this technical genius is online. The illusion of marriage, I'm going to add this story to the wonderful tapestry of memoirs that we've heard. Of course, I thought it was forever. My relation with this Latinx Jewish man from Uruguay with curly blonde hair and a round face, gorgeous. He was a lefty like me, took issue with the occupation, Israel's conquest of the Palestinian lands. Yet he agreed to serve in the army. I knew that some refused. Native Israeli kids didn't want to serve in the occupied territories. It was the early 70s, and we were both living in Israel. I, with a vision of cultural Zionism, slowly learning that it was a lie. Zionism, it seemed, always meant taking land not yours, because the owners are not of your religion or culture. I wasn't woke yet, but on the way. I had studied at the Hebrew University and started working there. I met M on the left side of the Hebrew University cafeteria, and that's where the lefties sat. Siach Matzpen, that's what they called us. I was Siach, the less radical movement. After all, I'm a reasonable, measured person. M was one of those Jewish Latinx immigrants spouting revolutionary theory, evoking visions of Che. How romantic. I kept checking him out. He had lots of friends, women among them. I would later on help one of those women, an Argentine, evade conscription in the Israeli army by giving her a vial of my pee-pee after I was pregnant. At the time, I had developed a fear of dating, not sex, but what we would have to say to each other. You don't have to chat during sex. And of course, I was sure that whoever I found attractive wouldn't want me. Maybe as a friend, but definitely not to date. So I was shocked when he asked me out. He talked a lot, no problem there. We hung out in his apartment, which he shared with a Chilean who played revolutionary Victor Jara songs over and over and over again. And as we sat with his friends, I learned all their lefty jargon, but M would silence me when I wanted to talk because, he said, I wasn't as well read in political theory as they were. It was a warning, which I did not heed. But as the relationship was getting serious, I was getting woke. Not by the pompous revolutionary talk of those dudes with beards and angry eyes in the cafeteria, from a hike with a great deal of rain in the hills outside of Jerusalem. We passed towns where the inhabitants were lined up stiffly, armed soldiers on each side of the line. I asked a student I knew from the university, why aren't they hiking with us? Are you crazy? He asked. Ishtagat. Then I understood. 1973, the Yom Kippur War happened. M went to war. He slept in the desert. He saw no action. He complained and felt sorry for himself. On one of his leaves, I got pregnant. We were married summer 1973 in an interesting little synagogue of the Hebrew University campus. I wore a flowing white gown, borrowed, but a lot of our friends wore cut-off jeans. After the wedding, we got home. My lefty husband asked me, when are you cooking dinner? Poof, the bubble burst. I hung on a few years, had the child. Now, he never did baby care. He would put me down whenever we went out with friends, and then he'd tell me I was stupid and uneducated. He'd scream at me, and then suddenly be nice as if nothing happened. Then I got smart enough and brave enough to walk out. Marriage, illusion. Done.
Well, quite a dramatic and honest and brave story to tell.
Thank you.
What an experience. Thank you. And our next storyteller is Tasha Paley. It's getting around dinner time, and Tasha is nice enough to give us a life cycle sandwich at this point.
Thank you for that introduction, Alan. I forgot what I had named my piece. So this story is about a friend of mine, I won't use her last name to respect her anonymity, but her first name is Kathy. And she was my very, very best friend through most of elementary school. I would go over to her house and we would trade charms. They used to have charms in this. Oh, I don't want to see myself. I'm going to close my eyes. I didn't think I'd see myself in a full screen. Is there any way for me not to have to look at myself? Well, whatever. I'd go over to Kathy's house and we'd trade charms that you got out of those little bubble gum machines. You put in a nickel and you got a charm, and we collected them together. And she had a family of, her father was Martin. He used to call me Heffalump. That was his nickname for me. And Felicia was her mom. And Richard was her older brother. And Frisky was the cat. And in 6th grade, she called me up and she said, my name was Patty in those days. She said, Patty, my father just died of a heart attack. And I said, Kathy, don't make a joke like that. That is not funny. But it was true. And so it was the first funeral I went to. Then in 8th grade, the school that I went to was a little private school called Walden. And we had a very small, our whole grade was maybe 25 kids. And I was with Kathy since kindergarten all the way through high school. So it was now 8th grade, and she used to have to leave in the afternoons, and I didn't know why she would leave class. And it turns out that her mother had stomach cancer. And at that point, Kathy was one of the cool kids, and I wasn't very cool. So I wasn't, she was a beatnik, and I don't know what I was, but I was a goody two shoes. And so I had drifted apart from her, and her mother died that year in 8th grade of stomach cancer. So now it was 2 down, 1 to go. And in 10th grade, I saw Richard in the hallway. He was way older, but he came back from Columbia for some occasion at the school. And he was blown up like a balloon. And I soon found out that he was on steroids because he had Hodgkin's disease. And so he died in 10th grade. So in retrospect, I thought, well, maybe Martin had a heart attack because he knew that Felicia, the mother, would have stomach cancer, would die 2 years later of stomach cancer. And Richard, it was predicted with Hodgkin's disease that 6 years after you're diagnosed, you die at that time. So he must have known that Richard was going to die. And maybe the realization of the stomach cancer and the Hodgkin's disease gave Martin the heart attack. So he was the first one to go. Kathy went off to college, and she was a wonderful artist. And I just assumed all my life that she was an artist, and I was riddled with guilt for years and years and years that I had not been able to be there for her when she went through these tragedies. I had grown apart from her, and so I just wasn't there for her. And I thought about her all those years, just all the time. And then we had our 49th school reunion, and Kathy was there. And I had found out shortly before then, maybe right at that reunion, that she had become, I assumed that she would always be an artist. And no, she had become a neonatal nurse. And she saw people, she saw mothers and babies at the time of birth and helped them to become healthy and strong. And I thought, wow, that is amazing. That here she was, she had 3 deaths. Her whole nuclear family was decimated. And then she became a neonatal nurse so that she could help babies be born. And I thought, and that's why I call this the life cycle sandwich, because on the first part of her life was death, and all through her life, and then the other piece of the bread or the sandwich was that she was a neonatal nurse. And so the remarkable way that we come to heal ourselves. And so because I felt so guilty, I asked her to go upstairs, and I said, we sat on the couch upstairs in this reunion, and I said, Kathy, I just want to apologize to you all these years that I wasn't there for you when all of these deaths happened. And she said, I think she was taken aback. It's like, what are you talking about this now for? But she said it was okay. She had therapy and it got her through. And she's been fine. And I said my amends. And I've just since then, I just did a playback show where the theme of it was resilience. And this to me is such an example of resilience, how she suffered terrible losses. And then she went into a career where she could bring birth and life into the world. So that's the end of my story. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that
Yep.
story about resilience
Mm-hmm.
and finding purpose through pain. You know, going through your pain and finding a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And our last storyteller today is Tilla, who's going to tell us about an expected turn of events from London to New York.
Hi, everybody. Have you ever had the experience that things just didn't turn out the way you had expected? Well, here's my story of an unexpected turn of events from London to New York, which took place in the very beginning of September in 1970. Starting in July 4th, 1970, my two girlfriends and I took a very exciting but economic 9.5-week trip through Western Europe. And we started in London and we ended there. Well, a few days before I was to leave London to come back to New York, we decided to go to a flea market called Petticoat Lane. And that was on Sunday, the Sunday before Labor Day. We had a great time. We did shopping. And then we came back thinking about our trip back to New York. But suddenly I discovered I had lost my beautiful passport case that my mother and father gave me as a gift for this trip. And it contained my passport and my traveler's checks. Oh no, I was beside myself. I was filled with such anxiety. I didn't know what I should do, what I could do. How will I be able to join my friends on the flight back on Tuesday to New York City? And what will my parents think? So I decided I would go to the US Embassy in London and report that my passport was stolen and see what I could do about it. But the office was closed. It was Labor Day. And so was American Express closed. So I couldn't do anything until Tuesday. And that was the day of my departure. My friends wanted to do something, but I really couldn't concentrate on anything that day. So early in the morning on Tuesday, I went to the American Embassy to report my missing passport. And then I went off to American Express to deal with my lost traveler's checks. Well, I didn't go alone. My friends were too busy, but I had a boyfriend that I met in Switzerland, and we hooked up in Norway and Amsterdam, and then he came back to London to see me. Well, I went in with him to the American Express office, and they looked so suspiciously at me. And my boyfriend, who at the time, he was a rather tall, broad African-American guy. and they were questioning my appeals to them and my tears, and they didn't believe why I had such a strong need to be reunited with my parents. And I said, I miss my mom so much. I need to be on my scheduled flight to New York. And then one of the men said, well, you can forget that. I don't think that will be possible. And I felt worse. Now, suddenly there was a call when I was there from the American Embassy. Somebody happened to turn in my passport case. Oh, I was so happy to get it back. And the passport was there, but not the money. Well, luckily I had my traveler's check numbers, and I thought I could probably get my money back. But I was so relieved I would be able to make my flight, which was on the same day. So I finally got to the airport, and nervous, but a little more relaxed, and found out the flight was delayed by like 3 or 4 hours. Because if you remember, in 1970, in September, there were like 5 or 6 hijackings on flights to London and New York, and some in Palestine or Jordan. And I was kind of relieved that I had some time to calm down. Well, it was an okay flight. And by the way, I used to be really scared of flying. So it was an uneventful flight. But when we were 30 minutes from New York, we heard an announcement. And they said, due to a crash at Kennedy Airport, we are going to be diverted to Bangor, Maine. Oh my. I had to stay on a hot plane with no air conditioning for 1.5 hours. Well, finally the plane did take off and we landed at JFK, and I was so happy to be reunited with my parents and back in New York. And my conclusion is that after all these unexpected events, it made me feel stronger and calmer and more focused. Well, at least for a couple of weeks.
Well, you were calm and focused enough to tell us a good story today. Thanks a lot. What an adventure. So we have heard from all of our storytellers today. What a great variety of reminiscences. Some current and lots of them going back in time, so far back in time. I'd like to thank all the participants. And I don't know if Liz wants, I'd like to thank Liz if she doesn't want to come back on, and maybe.
I'll come back on, Alan.
Good, good.
Okay, I want to thank everyone for your wonderful, wonderful stories. I want to thank Alan. I want to thank Warren and Susan for helping getting this whole Zoom enterprise underway. So thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to the participants for telling such wonderful, great stories. Take care and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. So long.
Start thinking about stories for next year's slam.
Oh, bye.
Arrivederci, Barbara.
Thank you. Arrivederci a tutto.
Prego.
Good. You're right. Altrettanto. Prego.
Prego.
That's right.
Prego,
That's the
prego.
word. That's the word.
So are we having feedback at our next meeting, or what's happened? Are we talking?